Welcome to More Action, the podcast for entrepreneurs, business owners, and professionals. I'm your host, Shelly Brien, and together we have candid conversations with industry leaders to uncover valuable wisdom and lessons learned. My hope is you use these lessons to intentionally take more action in business and life. I hope you share and enjoy. All right, we have a hot topic today here on the show, and it is something that I literally get asked about all the time, and it is working with your spouse. Of course, you know I have Mr. Chris Brien here with me, and Mr. Graybeard, I should say. But I wanted to tackle this topic together because I have been recently interviewed on a lot of other podcasts, and this topic always comes up, and I know it's unique, and I know that there's so many different sides to it. There's so many different things that we see on social media, just showing like do's and don'ts and whatever. I thought we would just come on here and talk about it a little bit more. And in fact, you know, it's something that I feel like even as we grow, it's changing. It's always ever evolving.
Mm-hmm.
And we're coming up on 20 years married. We're ever evolving too. So I think it is an important topic and one that's kind of a hot button. So if you've ever thought about working with your spouse, this is the episode that you're going to want to tune into. Make sure you are following, subscribe over on YouTube. If you're watching us, you can see Chris and his gray beard in all its glory. But I am excited to dive in. So
that's what you get when you work with your spouse.
Great. Yeah, you should see my hair. Holy cow. Ask Megan. I'm in there a lot more often than I wanted to be. But let's just dive in because I think that we were talking just kind of off camera before we got started just about one topic because we both have experience working in other partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you share some of those partnerships? Because this is a totally different level of partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe just off the bat, let's talk about what we don't want in a partner, regardless of like working with your spouse. Let's actually, based upon your experience, we both have had two business partners in previous businesses, two separate. So we have 4 separate experiences between the two of us in partnerships. We're going to take the inverse, right? And we're going to talk about what we don't want.
Well, I don't want a partner. That's number one.
Fair.
That's just based on previous experience.
Okay.
So,
well, what are some of the things that were bad?
Mainly I would say like the hardest part I experienced in partnerships was financial based. It was no like clear set, like even in the beginning, if there were clear set rules and part of your operating agreement,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone had like the intentions going in, it always got where, you know, I would say like a little bit out of control where a partner started like withdrawing money or paying for expenses that they weren't supposed to be paying for.
Mm-hmm.
And that everyone knows like you get involved in financial and money issues. That's gasoline right there for a fire.
Recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And you guys didn't have set lines?
No, and it was never really that one, I guess partners weren't necessarily doing their roles, maybe a little bit of that, but it really was more on the financial side.
Okay.
It was really on the more fun on that side.
So you guys each kind of had your roles, but it was the financial side there was no clear outline or guidelines or rules or agreement on financially.
And a lot of that is really because you were, I guess at the time when we were starting some of these companies, they were just like underfunded to start. And so like one person, like in most of my situations, I never took any money out of the business. Whereas the other person was, I guess, more like on the operational side and like working in it. So like they still had to make a living. Like I get it, but there was no plan to actually like, you know, me carrying the equity of that, my half and getting paid back. And like, it just kept almost became like I was working to pay someone else's salary. And then when they start just, you know, running the card for whatever they want, then that's when it goes downhill.
Yeah. quick, I think, and that's the same too in a marriage, right? And for anything financial, I think is always, it can be a really heated
Oh yeah.
topic, no
Yeah.
matter what.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that also goes to the mindset of who the partnership is and what the goals are, because like not everyone's goals are always 100% aligned. Everyone's different. Same thing in a marriage. Like everything, everyone has kind of their goals. There's a big goal, and then there's other little things that they want to do and things they want to buy and stuff just different. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So like that's the hard part, and then you it just they don't always line up. So while my goal might be I want to just keep putting the money back into the business and grow the business. I want to buy equipment. I want to pay off debt. I want to have capital to bring on employees. Other partners' mindsets are, oh, well, great, we got money. So now I'm going to spend it because they're looking at it as more of like a job, not really like a long term, it's its own investment,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
So it's its own. Do you keep funding your investment in your retirement account or do you keep taking away from it?
Yeah.
And that's what the business essentially is.
But I think you calling out the first thing of like it's two different mindsets
Hmm.
too. And while sometimes that can actually be a strength, I think there needs to, from our experience, there needs to be more of a direction or agreement on so many different things that make up the business and the decisions made for the business.
Yes.
And I can tell you, like, that what I have learned in partnerships, business partnerships, not ours. I've learned a lot, obviously, in ours, but in previous business partnerships is, I think the thing is, and this is a topic I know we're going to talk a little bit more about it today, but if you are partnering with somebody that has the same skills as you, why does there need to be a partnership?
Yeah.
And I think that oftentimes we can feel like, I mean, I've had so many, we've talked about them on the show, just like so many failures that at one point I was like, I just don't want to do it alone anymore. Like, I don't want to do this alone. And, one of the, I would say the more recent partnership, it was more just like an emotional decision to be like, I just don't want to do this alone. And so I brought in a partner and we had similar skills. And then there was some other things going on. I think end of the day, the way that the money was going to be spent to drive the business, who was going to be responsible for what roles. And when you have similar skills that you're bringing in, that can create challenges on its own.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think those are some of the things like going forward is like, and I know you and I have talked about this and I've shared it on the show, whether it's with you, doing a show with you and or just on other episodes is what's great about this partnership and probably what also makes our marriage really strong is that each other's strengths is the opposite's weakness. And so we balance out each other really well.
Hmm.
And be able to like support the other person. So kind of just some of the things I just wanted to just touch on real quick, do a little Charlie Munger, a little inverse, like what don't we want in the partnership? Those are some things you definitely don't want, right? You don't want to have an operating agreement. You don't want to have two people that do totally different things. Like,
Well, you do want an upgrade.
that's what I'm saying. This is inversion.
Okay.
So with inversion, you talk about all the things you don't want to happen, and then you do the opposite.
Yes.
Do you see what I
Well,
mean?
yeah,
And
you could
so
decide we don't want it to fail. We don't want one partner doing this and doing that. And then that's when hence you get into the operating agreement. And it's like really having like no one, everyone, because I've been there, it's where you have a great idea or
Mhm.
you something and you come together and you're like, hey, we could do this together. Let's get going. And it's all exciting. And nobody wants to talk about what could go wrong.
When everything
N-
hits the fan, what happens?
Nobody wants to have the uncomfortable conversation about percentage of ownership. And so a lot of times it just gets swept under the rug. But that's like literally just comparing that to like a marriage with a person is like that's like just assuming that the person you're going to marry wants to have kids and then finding out 3 years down the road they actually don't want to have kids and never wanted to have kids.
You never had the discussion prior
And you never
to
had a
marriage.
conversation to it. Now you're like, okay, what am I doing? Just wasted 3 years of my life or whatever it is.
Yep.
So it's huge. Any partnership is to go in and you got to have those conversations.
And they're not
And
easy.
they're not easy, but like it has to because potentially feelings get hurt. But you know what? If they get hurt, at least it gets fleshed out in the beginning and it doesn't go any farther forward instead of 2 years down the road and everyone throwing up their hands saying, well, I thought you were going to do this and I thought you were going to pay
Lots
for
of
this.
finger pointing.
And now we're dissolving it all and there's assets involved and livelihoods involved and it's a mess. So
yeah.
Get the conversations out of the way early.
So, okay, let's flip gears here because you've been hanging around. We're talking about what you don't want in a partnership based upon our previous experiences. But now I think some of the things that I want to talk about some of the things that we have learned and probably this one I want to talk about basically, you know, having one chief. And you can, I mean, there's books about this, but having like one kind of deciding person. That being said, I think you and I have a little bit, just when we were talking off camera, like a little bit different framework on how we think about this. So I'd like you to share
between you and me.
Between you and me.
Gotcha.
But it's not bad. That's the thing, is like sometimes in a partnership, marriage, or business, you have to like reframe certain things that you think that maybe this could be like something that you think poorly about or that you don't agree with or whatever. But then when you reframe it and understanding their perspective, but still holding true to your values, it actually makes 100% sense. To give you an example of all of that, I actually...
Also at the end, like personality type does come into play a little bit, that we didn't talk about that off camera, but I think it does.
Well, we can talk about personality because I think that's good. And
with my like idea of how things need to operate,
Yeah.
I think it works for my personality type, but I don't think it would work for someone who's a very controlling, like micromanaging type person. Because that's where you start getting the animosity.
Well, of the personality?
Yes.
Okay, so hold off before we talk about that. Let's keep everyone that's tuning in right now with this. And I hope you are, you know, hanging out with us either on social media too. Chris and I are both on LinkedIn as well as Instagram. And then over on YouTube, we share all kinds of information out there to help our fellow entrepreneurs. But let's talk real quick about what you shared off camera, like your ideal, like what your experience is in what makes a good partnership. There was one very big point that you had.
Yeah, I think that bottom line, in so many ways, the one person actually needs to be the boss.
Okay.
Like, and when I mean boss, I don't mean boss the other person around. I just mean one person has to be, and it's probably more along the visionary type role or the personality type. That's like, if you have a personality type like mine, where you're not a micromanager and you just want to hire the best talent and you want them to get the job done without having to come back and ask questions and not be able to take initiative, then like being in the form of a partnership, like I think needs to be, one person needs to be like clearly, ultimately the leader, right? Doesn't mean the partner is not a leader or is not worthy of being a leader or any of that. It just, between the two partners, one person has to be essentially take the lead, and the other person has to accept that that's what it's going to be. So when you come into a partnership, the person who brings the idea or who has more experience or in doing that really should be that person. And the person coming from behind can learn, but needs to take even just mentally needs to take more of a support role or a secondary leadership position behind that person, like co-captain. Just because just accepting, taking that mental acceptance and shift will like relieve all the pressure and the stress off of that person to try and jockey for position and make sure they're being heard, and they need to make sure that their opinions are being heard, where you still have the conversations and you still talk, but like at the end of the day, the one person needs to be the boss, you know?
Yeah. So you guys are probably hearing that right now and being like, ooh, Shelly's going to go off. Like, oh man. Because, you know, I'm pretty opinionated, obviously hold a ton of experience. But it is true what he's saying. And I think, I don't know.
Before you jump in,
talking.
Just I forgot one.
Yeah. You guys are catching this right now. Here we go.
One important thing. It doesn't even mean that as the business progresses, that person might not ultimately become the main person or main decision maker. Again, this is based on personalities and experience and where that company is going. So it could shift. The dynamic could shift. It's not end all be all, but it's at one point all the time, someone needs to be the boss.
No, I think it's a solid point. I do think it's a solid point. And I think the term boss, leader, take the lead, you use visionary, that's from like EOS and an integrator versus a visionary. Those two type of things. Remember, I said that each other's strengths is the opposite weakness. And Chris is much more of a visionary overall grand scheme of picture. I'm much more of an integrator with visionary tendencies. So the way that I run our internal teams is much more from a visionary standpoint. But between Chris and I, it is more visionary integrator on a lot of different things within the organization. Now, I agree with this because on a few different levels, however, I think there are some really important things to point out. Is when he said, someone needs to be ultimately the decision maker, right? And I guess let me talk about this in two ways. Is number one, if you are two entrepreneurs and then you come together and work as one, you've both been the decision maker, right? And so that's what Chris is alluding to is like, you're vying for like, who's going to be the boss, who's going to make the decisions, because you've been that person. And when you become a partner, it is a partner. And so then you have to look at what skills, experience, perspectives do I have? What does the partner have? And then lead in those areas. Because there are certain things like marketing, media, business development, hiring, just HR in general. I have more experience with. You're letting me take the lead on that, not letting me take the lead. I'm taking the lead on that because that's where my experience holds. Job site, managing projects, building a team. Like we have a lot of internal teams now. That's you. That's you in the field. I am not going to come onto the field and be able to like boss around or lead the field teams. That's not where I am. So I think too, it comes down to defining roles and strengths and being able to lean on those strengths. I think, I remember this in corporate so much. It was always like, what are your weaknesses? What are you going to do to fix them? I was like, nothing. I'm going to go work on my strengths and just go kick butt over there. Why do we always need to work on my weaknesses?
Yeah.
And that's where I think a good partnership can be. And so I think reframing it to where I just had to hush him, by the way, because he was going to interrupt me again. I think reframing it is that we are both, you've been talking more than me. We've both been leaders in previous, like we're both very strong willed, but like understanding that certain things you are taking the lead on, I'm taking the lead on, but also challenging each other. That's the other side of this is just because I don't know the field as well as Chris, I don't have the years of experience and I own that. It's not really where I want to be. So I'm good with that. But there are certain things that are happening in the field, like processes, systems, technology, where I'm going to challenge him, not because I don't believe he's making good decisions, but I'm like, how can we be better? And so it's having that relationship that like, yes, ultimately with this business, I would say a significant portion, you are the final decision. Doesn't mean I'm not going to be like, hey, here's my 2 cents. Here's my experience.
Right.
Here's what I think. Like, what about this? Do you think this is a good idea? I want to implement this and help you guys, all of these different things. And even when it comes to some of the, like, say, marketing initiatives that I'm running, you will challenge me on that too.
Yeah. Yeah. Look at any company out there, any major company. Do they have more than one CEO?
No.
No. Because you need the one person at the helm. It doesn't mean that the entire board or the executive vice presidents who may actually own more shares in a company than the actual CEO are any less valuable or aren't really good at leading their divisions and their roles. But at the end of the day, laws of nature, there has to be one person at the top that's ultimately looked at as being the main driver behind the business.
And so when you look at a partnership, having that like one person that is like the main leader
Right.
is defining who that is.
But let's tie this all into like relationships with
Spouse.
spouses,
Mm-hmm.
because that is not going to be an easy thing or an easy conversation in most marriages.
You're saying it's not an easy one
It
with
hasn't
me?
wasn't easy.
Trust me.
It will be a big problem in marriages with people that are very similar or very entrepreneurial. Or even if like there's been independence between it, everyone's kind of drives, does their own thing, is successful in their own areas, and then you decide to come and start a business together. That is going to be the driving failure, I think, is that not having that
Discussion of who's the
discussion
leader.
of an acceptance is the key.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be acceptance, because if there's not, and when I say acceptance, I'm not making it sound like it's like, like subordinate. You know what I mean? It's just understanding that at this point in time, you're going to take the lead on this. Let me know how I can help you. I'm going to work on all these things over here. I know what I'm doing because I'm really good at it. I'm going to run those teams. But at the end of the day, the big picture stuff and, you know, whatever that person's where they're starting
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like the lead. It has to be the lead. It just has to be.
Well, I think you brought up a good point that there's only one CEO.
Yeah.
There's only typically, I don't want to say there's only one founder, but sometimes there's co-founders, right?
Yeah.
But there's still one person that is truly,
Could you imagine a company with two CEOs? How devastating that would be to a company if like Boeing went and hired a second CEO and they like, I mean, now there are CEOs of divisions, and when you get companies in that size,
yes.
like but the ultimate top dog of the company running all of the divisions, if they brought in a second guy who was very similar as a driver and who wanted to do his own thing and to go a different direction, that would be them in the company.
Yeah.
So that's why I mean, like, that's the hard part because you multiply that in marriages with emotion and personal, like,
Mhm.
feelings and personal things and thoughts. And so
Yeah.
that's, I guess, the hardest part to work through. Or maybe just trying separating it out, like trying to set it aside. Is like it's separate. Like the business is one thing. We don't act that way in personal life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of gray area actually between us
Yeah.
and the business, and that's working for us right now, and I think that's where I feel like all the gurus, right, are saying like have strict boundaries, do all of this, don't do this. And where we are right now in growing this business kind of into like new territory that we haven't been to as far as size and potential, that there's a lot of gray area right now, and I feel like we're respecting it, but we're also like cognizant of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
of like, okay, wait, we were just talking about all these different like events. I mean, we're in Scottsdale, right? It's coming into season where it's going to be like events and parties and charities and all of these different things that we're going to be asked to go to. And
Mhm.
and I was telling you like, gosh, I feel like we should do that. And I hate the word should, but like we're not there. We see these people there. Maybe we should go there. And I stopped myself. Do you remember we just had this conversation? And I was like, actually, what's important to us right now?
Mhm.
The kids.
Yeah.
And so, like, we're actually sacrificing, and I say sacrificing in a good way. We're sacrificing these different events to maybe build relationships, network, do different things because a priority for us as a married couple is our family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it is a good sacrifice. I don't look at it like I'm missing out. I look at it like, okay, how are we going to do this differently?
Yeah.
Because right now, especially, with Jax being now in high school, I mean, we don't have many years left with them. That is the priority.
I guess you could ask like to like I'm sure people are asking like, okay, great, and that's all great and all. But how did you guys figure it out? Like, how'd you make it work? And I had just have to say it was a lot of fighting, a lot of walking on eggshells on certain things. And ultimately, I feel like it took a while, took a year probably.
A year, easy,
Um,
easy.
it was just being committed to what we were doing, but also like to each other. So I think that just sticking through it and not giving up is what'll get you through that portion. But like that's why I would like someone to be able to take this message and like if they're going to business or they are in business with a spouse and they're having these issues, is sit down and have this is what like we need to have the conversation and who's leading this for now.
Well, and I think, yes, you need to have that, but then each person independently needs to reflect on what they really want in the partnership too, in the business partnership.
Right.
Because obviously we're both very opinionated, strong-willed. We're workhorses. We're going to go do all the things. This podcast is more action. We take a lot of action. We take a lot of risk. Neither one of us are risk adverse. So like we do these things. And then it was like, we had both lived through partnerships that didn't work out, failed partnerships, that then it was like, I had to do, I'm telling you from me, and I don't think this is a man and woman thing. I want to point that out right now because that's not how it is. But I had to look at me and I had to be like, what is important to me right now? And again, it comes back to my family. So the kids. So for me, I didn't want to be the quote unquote boss. I just wanted to be able to own my areas of the business, be able to take those, do the things that I wanted to do it with, and support Chris with what he needed in the field. But a lot of our business decisions, like some of the big software purchases that you've made, like I'm not going to challenge him on that. If that's something that's going to help him, I'm like, go for it. Like if that helps you be better, do it. Like I'm not going to be like, oh, we shouldn't, and oh, let's look at it. I'm like, no, go. Like I support that. And so I had to do a little bit to be like, I don't want to be leading this whole thing right now. But
remember, just so you guys know, like this isn't like she's mentioned like man and woman thing. When we had the restaurant, I was in the support role. I was not the leader of that. I supported her in the back end stuff, the financial stuff, and repairs and maintenance and things like that. But I was not forward facing and I didn't do any of the hiring. I didn't do any of the scheduling. I didn't do any of the ordering. I didn't do any of that. She was clearly the lead on that. So it's not just, she said, men taking the lead over a woman. We've been in both roles. And they worked really well, and that's why I said, and we worked. And I'm gonna take some credit here. Under the restaurant, I had made that decision that she was going to be the lead and I was going to be the support and let her do her thing. When we shut that down, moved on with life, and we did the construction thing, we are doing the construction company. I took the main role, the main lead, but she didn't want to give up her leadership because she's been doing it forever and that's her personality type. And that's where the friction came from. She wasn't willing to accept at the time that I was running that company. And that's why it took a year and that's why it took a lot of fights. But eventually we worked through that. And so if anyone's listening to this, it would be a lot easier for someone just to sit down and make that decision. Like, okay, I'm willing to, even if it's for a short period of time, let's try it for 6 months or a year. You take the lead. I'm going to take support. I'll help you out as much as I can, run my divisions, but you're gonna make most of the decisions and see how it goes.
Well, but I'm going to stop you there because while he's sitting here telling you that he made that decision to be the support role and let me lead it, he didn't have that conversation with me, that he made that decision.
True.
And so we never had this conversation. It just happened.
Exactly.
And so that's where I think coming into this is that there was so much friction because before we never had that conversation for me to understand at a deeper level, like the decision that he made. And so then I had to and then after the restaurant, like there was another partnership, not with you. And then again, it didn't work. And I was like, what is it that makes good partnerships work while still maintaining this partnership? Our marriage is number one.
Right.
And so it did take a year because I was the boss. I was the one doing it. I made the decisions. I did all of that.
Yeah.
I signed all the paperwork. Like all of it's horrible. Like, and now I had to go through that on my own, but we didn't have this conversation, which I think made it take almost a year for us to navigate where we were going to be. And a lot of it was that self-reflection that I had to do. So it's like having the conversation. They're not hard. You're going to fight. You're going to argue. You're going to see different things. But what I would say is step back and look at the bigger picture. Don't just look at what you want, look at the bigger picture.
Yeah. And don't 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 have the conversation. Otherwise you'll start saying things to the other person who's your spouse to stay in their lane. And
That will not work out well for you.
that will not work out well.
No.
It doesn't go over well.
No.
So just having this conversation helps out.
It does. And I think understanding what Chris said is like, what's your experience? Like, what is your expertise that you can bring to the partnership? Because if Chris and I were doing the same thing for the construction company, we'd be spinning our wheels. You wouldn't get anything done. And then your teams wouldn't know who's the leader, who do they go to? You know what I mean? And so it's not just us as a partner, it's everybody else that we're leading. They need to know who is their lead and who is their go-to, but there is that overall leader of the organization. And I think that that is just really good for everybody to understand when it comes to partnerships.
Yep.
So, all right, we could go on. And I think we're going to have more episodes like this because I cannot tell you how often people ask me about this. And I don't think a lot of guys ask you, like, how's it working with your wife? And here's the thing is like, what I don't think for a second that Chris doesn't think of me as an equal. Like, I don't think for a second he doesn't think of me as an equal, but I will tell you, when I go out into the network in our industry, the wife, you know, does bookkeeping and doesn't make decisions at all and might do some business development. Like, it's very different. And so it's funny going out there, all of the judgment, I can just tell you that you're receiving as a husband and wife team, let it go. It does not affect you one way. So long that I know that he looks at me as an equal, I look at him as an equal. He is the lead. I am okay with that. We have our lanes that we stay in and that we focus on.
Optically though, like as you grow, it has to go away from being a family-run business, and that's why I think the one person.
Well, I think both of us disappear.
Well, no, I still think that you need like the ultimate like about us lead page. It does make it like we've just run into an issue recently with that. So that's another podcast.
We'll talk about that on a different time.
There are optics to talk about there though that you want to look out for. So
which I think we should actually do in a whole nother episode and even have on someone from marketing. So, all right. Thank you so much. I hope that you enjoyed this. And like Chris said, he was like, I hope this message gets out. So that is 100% into your hands. I'm doing everything social media wise to make sure that this show keeps growing organically. And you're going to see all kinds of things relating to business, personal growth, mindset, and working with your spouse. All right. Thanks so much. And don't forget to share it out.